What is up, everybody? Welcome to Rough Drafts, where I go deep each week on a specific topic in the current limited format. My name is Sam Pratt. This week, we're going to go deep on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is splashing and multicolor, specifically in Final Fantasy. One thing that I am not going to talk about is the basics of how to splash, like how to build your mana base, what is a responsible splash, what does a responsible multicolor deck look like. I'm going to ship you over to Limited Level Ups. For that, I will link a video that Alex did very recently in the description of this episode that goes really in depth on how to build a good limited mana base. So if you're curious about that, go check out that. I'm keeping this short and sweet. And I think this is an interesting topic to talk about this week because Final Fantasy is the set I've splashed the least in a very long time. Part of that is because I think this format is remarkably balanced. Like all the archetypes pretty much just work. So you're often way more rewarded for finding the open lane than you are splashing around for power. So because most of the archetypes are very balanced, you're very rewarded for finding the open lane, because there's 10 decks, there's 10 color pairs, and there's only 8 drafters at your table. So something's going to be open. And because everything works, it's going to be valuable to find that open lane. And just a lot of the decks are synergy based. They work within the color pairs. So something like black-red, in my opinion, don't get a lot out of splashing multiple cards from other colors. Like blue, for example, is synergistic with it, but you usually have enough to build a good black-red deck within black-red. So this all comes together to a set where I actually don't splash very much at all. But there are certain spots where I do, and I'm going to go through the different tiers of splashing. So like splashing one card versus a couple cards versus like building a whole multicolor pile and what that looks like. So I want to take a look at the concept of power versus synergy really quickly. I mentioned this last week talking about black and black's 2-drops. There's kind of a difference between building a limited deck where you have a couple of powerful cards or maybe, half a dozen very powerful cards, and the rest of your deck is set up to just play a normal game of Magic and focus on these cards to win the game. It could be more than that. It could just be like your entire deck is like C+ and above if the color is very deep, versus a deck where you're trying to build something that's greater than the sum of its parts. So I mentioned black-red earlier. I think black-red is actually one of the best examples of a synergy deck in this format. You really want to set yourself up with a bunch of wizard tokens, either through Black Mage's Rod or Cornered by Black Mages, kind of rip through your library with Resentful Revelation and Circle of Power. And when you get into that deck, you're going to have individually great cards, either rares or, just like strong uncommons. But that's very much a synergy deck. Like you want all of your cards to be pointing the same way, talking about the same thing, versus I think green in this format specifically really just cares about playing a lot of great cards. And I think this is often the case in green in a lot of sets where its commons are very flat in power level. Like I would say Town Greeter, which is 1 and a G, 1/1. When it enters, mill 4, and then you get a land out of the cards you milled. And then if you hit a town, you gain 2 life. I think that's the best green common. Beyond that, all of the green commons are like very medium, but it's got some fantastic uncommons, and its signposts specifically are very, very powerful. Almost every green signpost is great. And I think that is very important to note because when I draft green in this format, I like to position myself in a way to where I can play multiple of the off-color signposts. Now, this doesn't always happen. I'll go into detail. Like sometimes you just get absolutely hooked up in green-black and you don't need to splash anything. But a lot of the times, like Gladiolus Amacitia, which is the 6 mana red-green signpost with like the searches a land and has the landfall ability, like I'm pretty happy to play that in like a blue-green deck because green has really good fixing and I'm splashing a lot there. And that's a very powerful top-end card. This is, like I said, this is often one of green's strengths is getting to play a lot of powerful cards, both because sometimes green has really good uncommons and because green is able to splash a lot. The other times green is good, sometimes it just has like overrate creatures and it's able to attack and win. I don't quite think that's the case here. You can see that, for example, because Blitzball Shot, which is the 2 mana instant in green that gives a creature +3/+3 and trample, is not performing well at all in the data. And that's a card we had 2 previous times in the past like year and a half or so. It was called Staggering Size in Lost Caverns of Ixalan and Fanatical Strength in Murders at Karlov Manor. And it was a very good performer in each of those sets. So that really leads me to thinking that green isn't really about a beatdown plan. It's not really about like the green-white go wide. Like green-white is a pretty good deck and we'll play Blitzball Shot, but I think green-white is kind of the outlier in terms of what green is doing, what green's strength is in this format. So with that concept of power and synergy in mind, I broke down multicolor decks into 3 different tiers of splashing. So you can think of this like that iceberg meme where the guy at the top of the iceberg is all happy and then it gets more and more depraved as you go down. There's going to be 3 levels. So level 1 is you're splashing just a single powerful card. So you can think of this like you have a blue-black deck. It's just a normal blue-black deck. And you open a Dion and you have like a Crossroads Village and a world map or something. And you're splashing Dion, just a single powerful card. That's something that pretty much every deck in this format is open to doing. There's no real like hyper aggro deck, like maybe red-white, where the cost to your mana base is going to be way too great. Like, obviously, if the fixing doesn't get there, you're not going to splash. But like Dion is a card that I will try to play in almost every deck. And I think there's a whole bunch of cards in this format that are like that. I won't go too into depth on this, but that's kind of level 1 is just you're just splashing 1 card. Level 2. I have 2 different tiers in level 2, but we're going to say level 2 is like you're splashing like maybe 3 cards, maybe 4 cards. So you can kind of consider yourself approaching a 3-color deck. You're still most likely going to have a 2-color base and be playing some secondary cards, but you can like on 17 lands, this will show up like closer to a 3-color deck than 2 colors in a splash. There's 2 different reasons you would do this. One is, I'm calling it level 2A, cards that fit a theme. So this would be like if you think back to Aether Drift, my Esper piles, my Esper artifact piles, those were usually blue-white splashing black or blue-black splashing white. But the fixing was really good, so you could play a couple of your splash cards. In this set, I could definitely think of a Grixis deck, like a blue-black deck that cares about spells, has like Sahagins. Maybe you pick up a Kuja, which is the 4-mana 3/4 rare that makes a wizard every turn. Maybe you're a little light on interaction, you're splashing a Thunder Magic. Maybe you picked up a Sorceress's Schemes as a really good card draw engine. So level 2A to me is like these synergistic decks that bleed into a 3rd color because you get these excellent cards in the 3rd color that supports the theme. Level 2B, you're verging on a 3-color deck, but you're splashing not for synergy, but for power. This is where green really comes in this set. So I would say a lot of my green decks look like this level 2B. This tier, very often you would be like blue-green. You're a base blue-green deck, but maybe you're a little light on interaction, so you're splashing a Sephiroth's Intervention, and you picked up a couple of Cloud of Darkness. Cloud of Darkness is a card that, this is the green-black signpost. It's 5 mana, 3/3 flyer. When it enters, something gets -X, where that's the number of permanents in your graveyard. This is a card that is very, very easy to splash if you're a base green deck with access to fixing, which I'll get into in a second. And I'm happy to play multiple copies in basically any green deck. So this tier is more about getting more power into your deck. And then we get to the bottom of the iceberg, level 3, where you're just a full multicolor pile. I built full multicolor piles in many different base colors over the years. In this format, almost always base green. Like I said, this is the format where I've splashed the least in a very long time. And like I said, I found that my priority is finding the open lane, finding the correct like 2-color deck for me to be in rather than getting a bunch of power into my deck just regardless of the colors. Something like Tarkir was a lot of that for many of the decks. So when I'm base green, this is often like a Towns deck, like a full pile. This is when you open a bunch of really good rares that get past, or you get past a bunch of really good rares and you want to fit them all in your deck. Maybe you're doing like Town Synergy, playing the 7 mana draw 4, etc. So I'm going to go tier by tier and kind of go a little more in depth on the actual fixing that you would use in that. Starting with level 1. So I've labeled level 1 and level 2A the non-green tiers, and I've labeled 2B and level 3 the green tiers. So level 1. This is where the example I gave was you're a blue-black deck splashing Dion. Ideally, you're only splashing using lands. So you want 3 sources for your Dion. Dion might not be the greatest example because he costs double white to flip. You can think of some other very powerful single pip card in that spot. Ideally, you're doing this only off lands. There's very good lands in the set, the towns, the tap duels. So if you're blue-black, you're splashing Dion, maybe you have a Crossroads Village and a blue-white dual land and a Plains. No more than 1 off-color basic. You can see Alex's manabase video for that. I will occasionally play World Map in this spot. World Map is the 1-mana artifact that you can pay 1 and sack it to search for a basic, and then as a more expensive mode to search any land. If the World Map is a card where I'm a lot happier to play it if I care about non-creature spells or artifact spells in my deck. So something like Black-Red, the World Map actually triggers all your wizard tokens. So it can actually be a benefit to play that. Like I've played World Map in a 2-color deck there to up my non-creature count. Or like Blue-White, it's an artifact, etc. So this one's pretty simple. I don't really need to go into detail there. Level 2A, cards that fit your theme. The decks where I am splashing a couple cards for synergy purposes in this set, like I said, is artifacts or spells usually. Like it would be something like Esper artifacts. Maybe you're like some sort of multicolor white legends deck. I could see it. World Map doesn't exactly fit there. But like Grixis spells is a place that I could definitely see. And World Map is a non-creature spell for that too. So I'm much happier to play World Map, the more fixing that I need. Like I said, you could be some sort of white multicolor Legends deck. There's a couple of white cards that care about Legends, specifically Venat, which is the 3-mana 3/3 in white at rare that draws a card whenever you cast another Legend and has this like crazy flip activation. In those decks, Blitzball becomes very desirable, which is the 3-mana mana rock where you can sack it to draw 2 cards if a Legend dealt combat damage to a player this turn. And that is also an artifact and a non-creature spell for the other decks. Just a little less desirable, I found. The other fixing option in non-green that works really well for these decks is treasures in black. So there's Side Quest Hunt the Mark, which is the 5-mana uncommon. This card is really, really good. It's one of the best uncommons in the set. Pretty surprising. It's very easy to flip in the right deck. Namazu Trader, which is the 4-mana 3/4 in black that enters, you lose life, makes a treasure, and then you can sack stuff to surveil when it attacks. And Undercity Dire Rat, which is the 2-mana 2/2 that dies into a treasure. Treasures aren't really a full source, in my opinion, if you're like tweaking your mana base to account for multicolor. But they more let you like fudge the numbers. You want to be able to spend the treasures whenever you want, not when you need to cast your splash cards. So I don't count these as a full source, but like if I'm splashing 3 cards and I have like 5 sources in my lands or artifacts, and then I have a couple treasure makers, I would say that's good enough for me, because like having a couple treasure makers means you're often going to have a treasure laying around. So this tier, level 2A, the synergy tier, I'm most focused on finding the open lane in this format. So I'm not splashing that much. This was a lot more common in like Aether Drift or even something like Modern Horizons 3, where it has these like very clearly defined synergy wedges. Like in Aether Drift, it was like Esper artifacts. You can play like a very 3-color artifact deck in that format and be very confident in splashing a lot. In this format, I'm way more concerned about 2-color. It does happen though, a lot of times if you open a rare. I already mentioned like the example I gave was like blue-black and you open Kuja and then splash a couple more good red cards. So that's 2A. And then we're going to transition from 2A to 2B. And 2B, which is similar looking mana base to 2A to 2B, but you're playing the cards just because they're powerful, not because they're going for synergy. And like I said, this is where green comes in most often. And the reason I'm confident in splashing for power in these decks is because green has a bunch of cards that you already want to play that fix your mana. So in green at uncommon, you have Torgal, a Fine Hound, which is the 2-mana 2/2, taps for any color, and then has like text that gives counters to humans. And Summon Fenrir, which is the 3-mana green saga at uncommon. These are like cards that I would pick highly no matter what type of green deck I was in, and they automatically fix your mana. So it's really not like a big jump from going from 2 to 3 colors. If green is open, you're getting these good uncommons. Maybe you pick up a couple duels. And like I said, when I'm in this spot, I really like taking advantage of green signposts, especially Cloud of Darkness. Now, often I'm in green-black in this spot, so I already get access to Cloud of Darkness, but I also mentioned Omega and Gladiolus Amacitia as other like good green top-end cards you can play, and rares, of course, too. There's a lot you can do in the Sultai space like this, like green-black or green-blue splashing the other color. Red is actually another very good card to splash. You get access to Thunder Magic as a very good, cheap, single-pipped removal spell. A lot of these decks will be happy playing Sorceress's Schemes as this cool late-game engine. I will reference Quarter Calls again, limited level ups. He had a video this past weekend where he mentions that he really likes red in his like green multicolor late-game decks, specifically for Sorceress's Schemes and a couple other cards. And before I transition into level 3, which is the full degenerate like 5-color pile, just a note on some other green cards that I really like. Town Greeter, I mentioned this before. I think this is the best green common. I think Fat Chocobo, which is the 5-mana 4/4 saga that makes a 2/2 bird, is fairly close. Town Greeter is so important to the green-black decks and to a lesser degree the green-blue decks that I think Town Greeter is more important. This does not count as a source. Like if you're counting in a multicolor deck, I have a Town Greeter. It's going to let me see more of my deck to find my splash sources. This doesn't count as a source, but similar to treasures, this will let me fudge the numbers a little bit, just because you see so much more of your deck. And a similar card, one that I think is way not as good, is Commune with Beavers. So this is 1-mana green sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You get either a land, artifact, or creature. I think as long as you're not in like a green beatdown space, I think that a 1-of of this card is totally fine to play, especially if you have a couple really good rares that you want to hit. Like you've built your deck around finding these rares. I think this is a totally fine card to play. And similar to Town Greeter, if you are heavy base green, this is not a source, but it lets you see more of your library to find your splash sources, and it will let you fudge the numbers on your mana base just a little bit. Just make sure you're not dipping below like 9 green sources for either of those cards. One more green card before I talk about level 3, Prisha's Wanderings. This is the 3-mana instant at common. Search your library for a basic land or town, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and when you do, a creature gets a +1/+1 counter. I don't like this card, but I think if it checks multiple boxes for you, it is good to play. The specific reasons you would want this, either you have a couple of 2-drops that are really important for this. So either Scorpion Sentinels, which is the 2-mana 1/4 in blue that becomes a 4/4 if you have 7 or more lands, or Demon Wall, which is the 2-mana 3/3 in black with Defender and Menace, and like if you have a counter on it, it can attack, and then it has like this expensive ability to put counters on itself. Both of those are really good to curve into Prisha's Wanderings with. So if you have a couple of those, I'm more happy to play Prisha's Wanderings because that's just such a good start to be able to put the counter on them. Other reasons you might be interested in Prisha's Wanderings, is the landfall trick good? Like, do you have a ton of chocobos early in your curve, and getting a +1/+1 counter and an additional land drop, turning your 2/2 bird into a 5/3 potentially, is that really good for you? Then you might be interested in this card. Or are you just interested in like a rampant growth? Are you interested in getting up to 8-9 mana for something like Summon Knights of Round, Summon Bahamut, which are these insane mythic sagas? I would say if you feel strongly that one of those reasons works for you, or if you have multiples of those, I like Prisha's Wanderings there. I don't like it generically as a card in general. And now we're descending to level 3. And this is full multicolor pile. The reason you get into this deck is rares. I've mentioned this a lot of times on the show before, but something that I think about a lot is how there are 10 color pairs and there are only 8 drafters. So 2 archetypes are not going to be drafted by anyone at the table, at least 2. And Wizards also makes a lot of gold cards these days. So a lot of times there are going to be powerful gold cards running around the table, or even just powerful any color cards running around the table, especially in pack 3. So this would be some sort of draft where maybe you start with a really powerful rare and you get past other really powerful rares and you just want to be able to play all of them. And I know that sounds like Magical Christmas Land. This does happen, especially because there are these 4 insanely expensive and really good rares. So there's Summon Bahamut, which is the 9 mana colorless saga. There's Summon Knights of Round, the 8 mana white saga. There's Ancient Adamantoise, which is the 8 mana 8/20 like boss battle mini game card, which is really good. And also Arden the Usurper, which is the 8 mana demon guy in black. These are all cards, especially like Knights of Round and Bahamut, that it's not insane for these cards to get like past you, especially in pack 3, because like the white player at the table often is not going to be interested in Knights of Round anyway. So when you're building these like rare piles, you want to build it like a control deck. So a couple of pillars of building a control deck. You want your cheap cards to be good. I really like Scorpion Sentinel in these decks. That's the 2 mana 1/4 in blue. I don't mind a Grand Pulse Ochu, which is the 1 mana 1/1 Death Touch in green, as just like a speed bump. And you especially want good cheap interaction. This is just a pillar of a control deck. Something like Thunder Magic, Sleep Magic. These are all very good cheap interaction spells to play. And something I haven't even mentioned specifically in regards to Thunder Magic is I see green-red more as a jumping off point for these splashy green mid-range decks. So one card in particular is Nibelheim of Flame, which is the 4 mana like creature you control deals its power to every other creature, and then has this insane flashback mode. That card is very, very good. If I start with that card, I'm not sad to end up in green-red, like a green-red pile deck. And just like having access to good interaction in like Thunder Magic, Suplex is a really good way to set up these splashy 5-color control decks. Just like having those cheap interaction pieces is good for these decks. So green-red I know is like billed as like landfall aggro. I don't see it that way. I kind of see all of these green multicolor decks, these level 3 decks as like one thing. They're just like base green decks. You can pair them with whatever color you want. Another pillar of control decks that you'll want to think about with these decks is card advantage. If you have a lot of dual lands, which you probably do because you're playing a lot of colors, Travel the Overworld is very, very good. If you can get that below 6 mana, like if you can get that to 4/3 mana, it's absolutely insane. I really like Dreams of Laguna in these decks. That's the 2 mana instant in blue. It's like the Think Twice variant. I will say that card advantage is important for these types of decks because a lot of times you have cards specifically dedicated to getting lands out of your deck. But sometimes your rares give you card advantage. Something like Summon Leviathan, which is the 6 mana saga that bounces everything, will draw a card when it attacks. So the card advantage is less of a priority than the cheap interaction and stuff. One card I do want to mention and shout out in these pile decks, it's the namesake of the episode. It's Reach the Horizon, which is 4 mana sorcery. Search your library for 2 basic lands and or towns with different names and put them onto the battlefield tapped. This is a card that you're only interested in if you're in this full pile, like degenerate rare pile. I think it's very, very good if you're in this style of deck. Like if you have Knights of Round, which is a double pipped mythic, that becomes a much easier splash if you have a Reach the Horizon because that automatically fixes for that if you're not a base green white deck. This has to be worth it. You need to want the fixing and the ramp, not just one or the other, because there are more efficient ways to do both of those. And I will point out also that with Reach the Horizon and Precious Wanderings, you can fetch towns. So Some of the utility towns are pretty good. Obviously, the blue-green rare land is very good to fetch. It like flips into a vehicle. You would maybe play Adventurers Inn, which is the colorless land that gains you 2 life when it enters, if you're like heavy base green enough that your mana is really good. And one other colorless land I want to shout out is Eden, Seed of the Sanctum. It's a colorless land with an activated ability, 5 mana and tap it, mill 2 cards. Then you may sacrifice the land, return another target permanent from your graveyard to your hand. So you can, just a side note, you can mill without actually getting anything back if you're trying to hit something specific and don't see it, so you could try to mill again. I've really come up on this card in the last couple of weeks. I think it's a very strong payoff for having a good mana base, and being able to tutor it with Prisha's Wanderings and Reach the Horizon is a huge upside on this card too. So the last thing I'll say about these pile decks is they usually have some sort of theme that goes with them. So that could be like, maybe you are the Towns deck, like you're playing Travel the Overworld, the 7 mana, draw 4. You have like maybe Wandering Minstrel, so you care about towns. I've seen 5-color decks that go really hard on self-mill and recursion. So doing degenerate things with Sorceress's Schemes, like self-milling that, maybe looping 2 copies of them. I've seen decks that are really in on Reanimator, like they have these insane 8-mana sagas or creatures, and they're playing Evil Reawakened with maybe Sorceress's Schemes to get it back to reanimate these giant threats. I had a 5-color deck very recently where the theme was sagas. So I had Terra, which is the 3-mana green-red mythic that like mills 5 and then you get a saga back. I had a Knights of the Round. I had like Sleep Magic and Side Quest card collection as other enchantment hits. I had 2 copies of Summon Shiva, and then I also had a copy of Rydia, which is the green-red uncommon that loots or rummages when a land enters, and then you can like tap her and get a saga back. So like I was digging for my Knights of Round and reanimating it like that. Just usually when you're in like these 5-color pile decks, you can find something for your deck to care about. I would guess that's usually either Reanimator, Self-Mill, or Towns, but you know, you can be creative, figure it out. And I'm going to wrap it up there. It's kind of crazy to say, but we're only going to have about 3 more episodes of this format. So we're going to have 2 more after this episode, and then the last episode will either be like a Final Fantasy wrap-up or an Edge of Eternity's preview episode. Could be both. I'm not sure. It's crazy. It's happening so fast. But if you have anything that you'd like for me to talk about in the next 2 weeks, you can reach me at sampratt.bsky.social or samp6 on Discord, and I stream occasionally at samp_mtg. Oh, one last thing before I wrap up. I've been maintaining my own Arena Legal Cube for the past couple years. I own a paper copy, and that's usually where I draft it. But the past couple weeks, I've committed more to trying to draft it online more. So that would be drafting in Draftmancer, and then you export your decks to Arena to play the games. If you want to get in on the action, you can just shoot me a message on Discord. It's been really fun getting to draft it more. I would love to have more people to draft it with. So just reach out if you're interested. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.